Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response, built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. We are getting to the end of July of 2022. The summer is almost done, not completely done, but for a lot of people, summer vacations are going on. I know Europe is gonna go into Europe mode here and take on August for holiday or vacation, and then we'll get back to the kids going back to school. Usually for most folks, it's typically going to happen end of August, early part of September, and so forth. So we're kind of getting past the dog days of summer, if you will. We're going to get into a lot of things happening, whether that's football or whatever other types of things that you're really into. But I hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's staying safe. I want to let you know Aaron's feeling much better. He got the right medicines and the right rest and the right doctoring, and he is recovering well from COVID, and that's good. And so hopefully everybody's doing well, staying safe, and trying to stay cool. I know it's blazing hot everywhere. Anyways, I want to get to today's Sunday perspective. For those of you that have listened for a while, or at least for the last couple of years, we were doing Sunday perspective every Sunday, and Wednesday were interview shows. We had said earlier in the year we kind of got backlogged. We really did a ton of interviews for some reason. I don't know exactly. It wasn't on purpose. We did a lot of interviews. We had a whole lot of really good topics, good guests, and I think that's paid off. We've seen a lot of interest from you. The number of listens and shows and downloads and all that have all been way up this year. And so thank you so much for that. But I think we're going to start getting back into kind of the cadence of Wednesday interview and Sunday perspective. I've had some time to build up some backlog of ideas and topics for Sunday perspectives. Not that the number of guests have slowed down, but I think we feel like we can balance it out a little bit better. So today we're going to do Sunday perspectives. I think we're going to do Sunday perspectives again next week as well. So I think we're going to try and get back into that rhythm. I can't guarantee that we will always do Sunday perspectives. We may, again, get into a backlog of some really interesting topics and guests. But today we're going to do Sunday perspectives. So today what I want to talk about is the concept of DevRel, or developer relations, or developer evangelism, or developer advocacy, or anything that sort of falls into that category. And I'm going to call it DevRel because that tends to be the term that community tends to use the most. It's the title people use the most. And I'm kind of my thought process was, and as I'm sort of calling this the DevRel Dilemma. Actually, at some point I was going to kind of title this the Kelsey Hightower Dilemma, but I have so much respect for Kelsey. I didn't want to sort of call him out because my intention is not to call him out, but I didn't want to put it in the title and then have people go freaking out and saying all sorts of things. But anyways, what I want to do is I want to talk about sort of where we are with developer relations and kind of how we got here, and some of the background of this. And I'm not sure if this show is going to be 15 minutes or 35 minutes. There's a bunch of stuff I have sort of mapped out in my brain as to how I want to lay this out, and we'll sort of see how it works itself out. But I want to spend some time for those of you that are newer to our community, newer to tech, kind of how do we get here? So we're going to do a little bit of historical perspective and context to sort of figure out how we got here, because the reality is, this concept of DevRel, the name DevRel, even just, conceptually, this idea hasn't really been around that long. I mean, it's probably been around for around 10 years or so. So not that long, especially for those of us that have been around the industry for a lot longer. It's a fairly new concept. I want to talk about how we got here. I want to talk about sort of how it's evolved. And I kind of want to highlight some things that I've heard just over the last 6 months to a year that to a certain extent concern me a little bit. And I'm going to highlight them as some concerns I have based on some patterns I've seen in the past, some concerns I have based on some comments that people have said about kind of where they want to go with their career and what they're trying to emulate and these types of things. And then I think, put some reality back on myself about, just kind of what this new generation, whether it's the age of this new generation of folks, kind of how they consume information, how they like to interact with each other, the way that they're trying to build personal brands. Like I need to sort of balance these things out. So I'm going to try and do all that after the break. We'll dive into it. So we're going to dive into sort of a lot about DevRel and what I'm going to call sort of the DevRel Dilemma right after the break. Today's episode of the Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog. Bring speed and scale to your security organization. Datadog Cloud Security Platform delivers real-time threat detection and continuous configuration audits across applications, hosts, containers, and cloud infrastructure. Built on top of the observability platform, Datadog brings unprecedented integration between security and DevOps aligned to shared organizational goals. As a listener to the Cloudcast, you can sign up for a free 2-week trial to see for yourself how Datadog can elevate your cloud infrastructure security posture by visiting datadog.com/security-cloudcast. Sign up now and receive a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/security-cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to kind of frame up this DevRel situation in a couple of different ways. And I'm going to go ahead and just start sort of contextually and historically. I know, I've done this before in past Sunday Perspective show, but I kind of want to put it in perspective. Obviously, the concept of a developer has been around for a long, long time. We've had developers of applications and developers of software for, more or less as long as there have been computers, right? So, once we started getting into open systems, which for those of you that are younger, you have no idea what that means, but there used to be times when you could only buy hardware and the only software that would run on it from the same vendor, from vendors like IBM, right? So we used to talk about this concept of like closed systems and open systems. Open systems essentially was the time at which you could buy hardware from lots of different companies, mostly x86 based, computers and servers and so forth. And then we went through a whole phase of, different ways in which software was bought, whether it ran on Windows. Again, some of you may be like, Windows, what in the world? But yeah, there was entire ecosystems that were built on top of Windows, entire ecosystems that were built on top of Unix software that ran on Sun machines and HP machines and so forth. And then obviously there was the whole phenomenon of open source software and everything that happened with Linux and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is, in the context of this, of DevRel, right, we had previously, people like Microsoft employed lots and lots of people to go off and teach the world, how do you build software? How do you become an expert interacting with Windows? Red Hat had tons of people that were out teaching you how to interact with Linux. And, so the function of teaching people new concepts and new ideas and, how to build software, how to customize it, how to, optimize all those things, those have been going on for decades in our industry. And I think if I kind of put this in historical context, where the concept of sort of DevRel really came along had less to do with a specific technology coming out. It really had to do with a couple of really sort of business level things. And that may seem a little bit weird because, but hear me out, right? So we had, we had the internet explosion up through 2001. In 2001, the internet bubble crashes. The internet doesn't crash, but the hype and the funding around it crashes. 2001 to 2008, we have this new phenomenon of how applications were built. We got into some more distributed types of applications because, again, you didn't necessarily have all the money that was going on there. You had companies like Google got started, and you had companies like Twitter got started, and a bunch of things happened. You had Amazon Web Services got started in 2006. And then we had, the financial crash in 2008. And sort of what happened between that late 2000s and early part of 2010 was you had a couple of interesting things happen. You were beginning to see more and more companies that were beginning to realize that as much as whatever they built, whatever they did in the physical world, they were beginning to do more online, right? So online, better websites, better, eventually mobile applications as the iPhone came along and smartphones came along. And then you had this sort of seminal article that was written by Mark Andreessen in 2011 in the Wall Street Journal called Software is Eating the World. And at that point, it was sort of a wake-up call because, again, it wasn't written in a technical journal. It was written in the Wall Street Journal, right? The sort of, at the time, the center of the business world. And, it was sort of a wake-up call to a lot of CEOs, a lot of, kind of thought leaders within organizations that we need to start saying things like, we're no longer a car company, we're a software company. We're no longer a pharmaceutical company, we're a software company. We're no longer a petroleum company, we're a software company. Because they were seeing what was happening in the valuation of companies. We were seeing the rise of Google and the rise of Apple and the rise of, a lot of technology companies, in terms of like stock market valuations. And they were beginning to finally sort of think through like, oh, okay, if the front door of our store, of our empire, of our retail, or the front door of our grocery store, the front door of, whatever is no longer this physical thing on Fifth Avenue in New York, or, in this highly desirable location, it is, www.mycompaniesname.com. That changes everything. And people started to kind of percolate it and they kind of got it. And then you had other really important books that were written. Stephen O'Grady, who's at RedMonk, one of the founders of RedMonk, wrote an awesome book called Developers, the New Kingmakers. And he began to put together kind of the economics behind what it meant to invest in developers, right? So we didn't really think of developers as necessarily people who were differentiating our business in the past. We thought about, well, we bought this ERP system and that differentiates our business. We have this really great email system and that differentiates our business. Or we have this really interesting, whatever, that differentiates our business. Stephen made the case and previously Mark Andreessen made the case and many others had made the case. The thing that's going to differentiate your business is your ability to write software that will, change the experience that people have with you, right? The way that you interact with customers, you interact with your marketplace, you interact with data and all these sort of things. And at that point, 2013, 2014, we get into things like Docker coming along and, software became a little bit easier to use. Developers started having these sort of free tools that were making things a little easier to use. So, the whole concept of like, I need to focus on developers is really probably less than 10 years old. And, again, you could argue, hey, Steve Ballmer went out there and went crazy in that video and clapped his hands and went nuts and said, developers, developers, developers. Yes, that was about getting as many companies as possible to develop software that would run on top of Windows, right? But it wasn't always necessarily thought of as the thing that was going to radically change an industry. It was thought of like, hey, that will give you more tools to maybe make you more productive for your business, right? So again, we go through these phases. So contextually, this concept of, hey, we need to be relevant to the developer. So if you were a technology company, you were a technology open source project, we need to be relevant to developers, right? That sort of came into fashion in 2013, 14, 15, whatever. And, as with many, many things in technology, companies got into doing that, whether or not it was completely relevant to them or not. And I say that having worked at infrastructure-centric companies who their tools, even if they, were software, were never really going to be used by developers, application developers. And so what ended up happening was we started saying, oh, well, everybody using software is now a developer. And this was, there was this was when the DevOps sort of thing took off. And, it was, well, we're going to do infrastructure as code. And so what we did was, the industry as a whole sort of said, well, if developers are the most important thing in the world, and then every technology company or every technology project or every technology-centric thing said, well, wait, if developers are the most important thing and we're not tied to developers, we need to expand the definition of developer. And hence we got into things like DevOps and infrastructure as code. And everything that you touch that was software should follow developer patterns. And this is all fine because in reality, there was a lot of good thought process. There was a lot of reality. There wasn't just a lot of sort of marketing fluff that went into the idea behind, at the end of the day, companies that were very good at building software, managing software, deploying software, making changes to software. If you could do that holistically across everything that touched software, a lot of times those companies were gaining market traction. They were better than their competitors. They were able to innovate faster. And so, we began to see the sort of rise of DevRel. And, in the context of, people, probably most of the people who listen to this show, probably the most visible person first off that started doing this was a guy named Kelsey Hightower. And whether or not you know Kelsey or not, go look him up, do a YouTube search on him, Google search on him. Kelsey, and this is meant as no disrespect for Kelsey. Kelsey, for a lot of us who had been around the tech industry and felt like we had seen a lot of different aspects of the tech industry, Kelsey sort of came out of nowhere. And I don't mean that in a negative way. He was doing whatever he was doing, and he's told his story hundreds of times in different podcasts. I mean, he was a very classical story. He was a technologist who, started off working in various types of support jobs, and then he was doing various types of sort of developer jobs, writing scripts, all sorts of stuff, basically making computers work, which a lot of us do in our career. We start off somewhere either fixing computers or making computers work. And he figured out that he had a knack for not only doing that, but also being creative and figuring out stuff that nobody else could figure out. And then the other thing he figured out was, not only am I pretty good at figuring that stuff out, I'm pretty good at explaining it. And so for a lot of people, the first time you heard of Kelsey Hightower, and again, this was say like 2015 or 2014, Kelsey Hightower was working as a product manager at a company called CoreOS, who was one of the early days of Kubernetes. And he was kind of their first product manager, or at least he was kind of their first visible product manager. And so here was this guy, talking about Linux and talking about Kubernetes and, this new technology that was, kind of buzzy, and we weren't exactly sure what it meant. And it came from Google. And so you weren't sure if it was going to survive or not. And he did this really amazing thing, which was he realized, okay, behind the scenes, this is really powerful technology. And so that was the part of his superpower that was, I can understand technology. I've gotten my hands on it. I understand how it works. I'm able to understand stuff that is really new. So that was a superpower. That's hard enough to do as it is. And then the second thing he did was he said, what could I do to help the community in order to, help them? Because this is something that, was in his best interest for it to succeed. He obviously, had an interest because CoreOS at the time, his employer was behind it, but also I think he felt like this was pretty powerful technology. If it succeeds, there's a lot of potential with this. And he went and wrote something called Kubernetes the Hard Way, which at the time was a really different thing. Let me put it in context. A lot of companies or even technologists would go, well, okay, here's something new. I'm going to kind of write some explainers, and then I'm going to kind of, write a best practices. And then we would write, and we did this for a lot of times, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we would write these solution guides, basically like best practice guides. And they would basically be like, here's the technology and here's how you should use it. And here's different scenarios that we think are going to be common. And here's how you size it. And here's how you configure it and all the stuff, basically kind of a blueprint for how you do these things. Now, we did it as a function that we used to call technical marketing, which, in the big picture of things that we do in technology is sort of a classic example of us taking two things that feel like they're sort of opposite of each other, but if you think about it holistically, kind of have to work together. And technical marketing was just a concept that said there's going to be times when we have complex technologies that we need to explain to people in various ways, whether it's demonstrations or written best practices or whatever. But we also need to explain it in a way that's not entirely geared just about engineering, but it's also geared towards like, why is this valuable to you? Like, why should you care? And we used to call that domain of job technical marketing or TME or TMM. You would hear these sort of things. And again, it sounded like an oxymoron. You're taking technology and marketing, which everybody thinks is not technology, and you kind of mash them together. Well, that was the genesis of what's become DevRel, because what Kelsey and Ashley did was he said, I'm going to write this thing called Kubernetes the hard way. And his intention was it was a learning exercise for himself, which we always encourage everybody to do. Go get your hands dirty with this stuff, learn it, figure it out. But he wrote it in a way that was sort of trying to, I think, scare people off a little bit, but he was also trying to highlight this thing that's so powerful is also very complicated. And I'm going to get to why I'm kind of making this such a long-winded story. And then what he could do is he could go, okay, if you're really interested in Kubernetes, I highly recommend you spend however much time going through Kubernetes the hard way, which is literally, just the pure open source with whatever docs were available, and kind of, cut yourself on the jagged edges and bump your head on stuff and kind of be frustrated and realize, this is powerful stuff, but it's still got a long way to go. And then it gave him a vehicle to then compare and contrast that to what they were doing at CoreOS, which was trying to simplify it, trying to get rid of all the sharp edges and try and make it as simple as possible. And so it was this really powerful way for somebody to go, I'm going to become an expert in the technology. I'm going to create an interesting communication vehicle to bring people to the technology. But then I'm also going to use it as a marketing vehicle to compare it and contrast it to this thing in which he had a vested interest as the product manager for CoreOS to do that. And again, it's the same thing of smart technologist having to learn it, having to explain it, but then also trying to put it in context of value. And at the time, Kelsey didn't call himself DevRel. He just said, hey, I'm Kelsey. And at the time he was the product manager. Then he went over and became something at Google because Google was obviously very big into Kubernetes. And the reason I go through that whole long-winded thing is we often see with DevRel or DevEvangelist or DevAdvocate, again, all these sort of terms that get mashed together that are saying the same sort of thing, which is my job is to be an expert in technology, but it's also to explain it to people. And this is where I think sometimes we struggle with or at least I struggle with sort of the state of where DevRel is these days, because I think it's evolved, right? First and foremost, I think we have gone through the sort of naming evolution, right? It really started off as like developer evangelist, and then people went, I don't know if I really want that term because it seems kind of churchy or religious, and I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to preach to you. I'm here to. It became developer advocate because they wanted to advocate on behalf of developers back to, say, their company, right? So, they would say, well, my job is to go off into communities and talk to developers and listen to their pain points and then bring those back to the product teams or the engineering teams that are working on these projects or the community. And, that concept, that sort of middleman concept was well respected because it said, somebody's got to do this, and somebody who is technical enough to be able to talk to developers, not scare them off, be able to answer their questions, so understand the technology well enough to deal with stuff. And then, also be gifted enough as a communicator to be able to go back to your team or your group or whoever you're representing and say, this is a problem. We should prioritize it, because if we prioritize it and we fix it in certain ways, where we take certain feedback, it will continue to delight the developers. Hopefully they will continue to use the technology, right? And the implication there was, well, if we're listening to developers, if we're listening to this constituency, maybe eventually they will buy our product, right? And this especially happened in open source. Now, one of the things that I hear a lot from folks in the DevRel space, and they make it very obvious, they want to let you know a lot, is we're not marketing. We don't do marketing. We have a marketing group. I am not marketing. And this is an area where I sort of struggle, because the reality is you're marketing. There's no two ways about it. If you're working for a company and you're doing DevRel, are you selling? Maybe. Yeah, you are selling to a certain extent, but you don't have a quota. And you're probably going to tell yourself you don't sell. Well, the reality is everybody who works for some company sells on behalf of what they're doing, right? They're advocating for what they do. Are you building the product? Well, in most cases, no, you're not necessarily building the product. You might be building scripts, you might be building demos, you might be contributing back to the product, but you're probably not core engineering. So you're not sales, you're not core engineering, you're not the management and leadership team of the company. What are you doing, right? You're out there talking to potential customers. Now, you may not look at them as customers. You may say, well, they're developers, and I don't think of them as customers, and I don't think about them as people that are going to go into my lead funnel or any of those things. They're just developers. But the reason you're talking to them is because they've identified that they are interested in what you're working on. So at the end of the day, you are marketing. And the more you kind of fight that you're marketing, the more it becomes a struggle to go, well, if you're not marketing, you're not sales, you're not engineering, you're not leadership at the company, then what are you doing? And I only highlight that not to sort of get into some sort of argument with people about, oh, we're marketing, I'm not marketing, whatever. You can do all those things, and you can say that you're not something during great economic times. When there's struggling economic times, if you can't justify what you're doing and you can't tell people where you fit in an organization, it becomes real easy to go, well, then maybe we don't need you, right? So my guidance is always like, you can fight that you're not marketing, because I know, there's the whole saying of you can't market to developers because they don't want to be marketed to. You're marketing. It's okay. You don't have to be offended by that. Now, the second piece that I struggle with a little bit with the DevRel, how it's evolved, and this is really kind of not people's fault, but at the same time, it becomes this crutch. And it's this. Back in the day, as an industry, we very much had companies and technologies that sort of fit into swim lanes. These companies and these projects did databases. These companies did networking. These companies built, programming languages. These companies did security or firewalls. You distinctly were, in one of those swim lanes, and you didn't tend to necessarily swim into other lanes. Yes, there were people who would go, yes, I can connect together these servers, this compute with this storage, with this networking. Okay. That was great. It was harder than a lot of people thought, right? It's the same sort of thing we have today where people say, well, I'm a 10X or a full stack developer. We didn't used to have those types of things, right? Again, we were much more siloed. People had distinct sort of skills, and they sort of had an ancillary understanding of what somebody else would do. And then sort of this open source explosion happened. Everything sort of happened, like I said, since the last 10 years or so. You have things like the CNCF, which accepts every project under the sun. And, then you start asking your DevRel team to go, well, I need you to go off and do a demo. I need you to demo this front-end technology, this middleware technology, this, event-based streaming technology, this back-end storage technology, and overlay some AI technology. And on top of that, maybe sprinkle in some serverless and do a little bit of this, because people would go, well, all those things are in the CNCF. And I guess in my mind, I'm assuming that's what the new stack looks like. And if you're representing part of it, well, why don't you just know all of it? And I think this is where we've gotten into a lot of situations where, DevRel people, to a certain extent, sometimes they have to connect some stuff together to sort of show how things work. And that's a good thing, right? They're kind of getting around that. But then there's this expectation. And I think sometimes they put the expectation on themselves that, well, I know everything. I have to know everything. I think in their mind, they're telling themselves, I don't really know everything. I grabbed a demo off of, whatever Stack Overflow that I could find and plug some stuff together. But there becomes this thing where people go, well, now I have imposter syndrome. I don't really know everything. And I think the reality is people don't expect you to know everything. Now, again, some of this goes back to this sort of Kelsey Hightower dilemma that's happened, which is I hear a lot of people in DevRel or people that want to get into DevRel go, I want to be the Kelsey Hightower of my space. And to a certain extent, that's an awesome compliment to Kelsey. It's an awesome goal to shoot for. You may or may not get to that or not, because Kelsey is a sort of a unique industry, a unique sort of thing in our industry. But I think the other thing to remember is, there's a little bit of a smoke and mirrors thing that Kelsey does, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. He is such a fantastic speaker. He's such an incredible and motivating speaker, an articulate speaker, and he's a very good storyteller that, it's not unusual that he speaks at a developer conference, at a data conference, at a DevOps conference, he keynotes some other thing. And, because Kelsey's Kelsey and he sort of challenges himself to go, well, I'm going to try and do this thing. I'm going to try and get COBOL to work in containers. And then over here, I'm going to try and do this thing with Python. That people go, oh, well, in order to be the Kelsey Hightower of this thing, I have to be able to be competent enough to stand up in front of thousands of people on any given week and knock it out of the ballpark and just kill it. And I think the reality is, and if you ask Kelsey would probably tell you, and I know this from, a lot of really smart people who end up doing a lot of the types of things that Kelsey does. Those folks are going to tell you, look, I got a lot of that stuff working literally last minute before the demo went on. My fingers are crossed. There was some duct tape involved and some bubble gum. And they'll also tell you, look, I might have been the smartest person in the room, but I was only the smartest person in the room by about 5 minutes because I just learned this stuff. And the thing to take away from that is if you don't know all those things, it doesn't make you an imposter. It doesn't give you imposter syndrome. It sort of says you're setting the wrong expectation for yourself, right? Kelsey's worked himself into a situation where I think if you asked anybody, like, what's Kelsey's specialty? It's not technology anymore, right? Like he used to be a Kubernetes specialist and some of the cloud native stuff. He's now a fantastic storyteller. He's really good at learning about learning, but he's not a specialist in the same way he was in 2015, right? The demands on what people want from him have changed and he's evolved with that. It doesn't mean that's what you have to do. If you want to be the Kelsey Hightower of your area for DevRel, be the Kelsey Hightower first and foremost of 2015 for your area. Be really good. Figure out a way to know your technology, to create ways in which other people can learn it at scale, which is one of the things Kelsey did. And then you have a foundation to go, and here's how it can be better. And here's where we can improve it. Here's where we can simplify it. And here's where we can do it. But it doesn't mean that, if you are working on the next Kubernetes, whatever that thing is, that you have to go building stuff in Python and COBOL and Go and integrate it with an Alexa and do all this, be the Kelsey Hightower of 2015, as opposed to getting yourself wrapped up into this, hey, I'm an imposter because I can't do what Kelsey does now. And because if you're starting this thing, number one, you got a learning curve in your own domain, but you also don't know what he's gone through over the last 7+ years, right? Like the evolution of Kelsey is pretty amazing. And again, I keep coming back to, he's a pretty unique thing and you might be the next amazing Kelsey Hightower person, but he didn't get there in one day. He didn't start where he is right now. Now, the last couple things I'll sort of highlight, and this is what's been a smack in the face for me around DevRel to a certain extent, because I've worked with technical marketing people for a long time. And, in our industry, people used to stick around in jobs longer. And there also used to be able to sort of draw a very direct line. You'd go, that's Mike. He's an expert in this. he's working on these technologies, and those technologies are relevant to our business. So when he goes out and talks, I have complete confidence that yes, he's going to go give a technical talk about this thing, but anybody in the audience would go, oh yeah, 9 times out of 10, Mike is also associating that with the company that he works back with. And that was kind of the way that our industry worked, right? So-and-so would get up there, Mike, Michelle, Sarah, Steve, whatever, and they would go, hey, I'm so-and-so. This is my job title. I work for this company. And, and people tended to work a little bit longer. And now I think what we see is a couple of things have happened. One, people bounce around a little bit more frequently. Whether that'll happen after the pandemic and the Great Resignation, we'll see. But it feels like people are bouncing around more frequently. They only stick around for a couple of years. So there's less sort of connected tissue between the company you work for, the products that you're supposed to be sort of aligned to, and what you're talking about. So that's those fibers have become stretched more than they were in the past. So a lot of times you will see people go, yeah, I saw so-and-so speak. They're a great speaker. What did they talk about? Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. They were just really really interesting, right? So we've sort of lost a little bit of that. And then I think the other part of it is something changed a few years ago. And it's been 4 or 5 years in which, the places where people will go speak, because this is a lot of where DevRel sort of makes a name for themselves. They started saying, oh, you know what? The people running the events, the committees, verifying stuff, they were getting overwhelmed because everybody was like, hey, we got to be out here. Every company's got to be out here. Every group wants to be out there. And they were pitching themselves in their talks. And, you'd go to conferences before, and there was a lot of talks that were, yes, given by vendors or given by some project. And yes, it would be about what they do, but it was always intended to teach you something, right? It was very rarely just a 5-minute commercial or a 20-minute commercial. But what's happened is those committees, in order to sort of counterbalance this or go in a very different direction, they've been very, very explicit about there will be no vendor talks. If we have any hint that you're talking about your product and you're trying to sort of pitch it, if you will, even if you're just going look, we do something pretty interesting with our technology, I think it would be beneficial to the audience to talk about it. And yes, it happens to have a company logo on it or whatever. Those are getting thrown out in more cases than not. And so we're getting a lot of DevRel who are having to create a lot of talks about other things. And those other things are fine. They're talking about burnout. They're talking about, teamwork and collaboration, and a lot of rehashing of the stuff that people are now questioning, like, oh, wait a second, we did that with DevOps. Well, now what is DevOps? We're starting to see that happen with DevRel. And again, some of these are things that are not completely within the DevRel people's control, and it's whatever. Now, the good thing is we're seeing more and more of the DevRel community, especially with the pandemic, who have, created YouTube channels and Twitch channels and other things that they're doing online in which they can control the content. They're creating podcasts and other stuff. But there's definitely been sort of a disconnect between the thing that DevRel is representing and what that is. And the reason I bring that up is, again, we get back into my sort of diatribe about I know you don't think you're marketing, but you're really marketing, is, we're creating a situation in which companies are going to start saying, well, if the purpose of DevRel is to go be connected to that, but go be connected to those communities, developers and so forth on our behalf, but you're not doing it on our behalf, they're going to start kind of questioning why they're investing in DevRel, right? And it creates this sort of interesting dilemma. And I had an interesting conversation with somebody who works in marketing. We were talking about sort of how they think about, trying to grow a business through marketing, through concepts like top of funnel and demand gen and all these sort of things. And they said, oh, well, one of the things you really need is you need, a few, kind of spokespeople, really. They said, oh, it's great to have great DevRel people. And I said, yeah, that's great. I said, what do you do if your DevRel people aren't talking about your product, right? Or even your technology? Because a lot of that's getting kind of shut down or muted or disconnected or whatever. And they go, yeah, that's a trend we're seeing quite a bit. And it makes it very, very hard to do that. And again, I only highlight that because not to knock on anybody doing DevRel. It's smart people. But I think you got to remember that at some point you're doing it on behalf of somebody. Now, if you're doing it independently, if you start an open source project and you're really just trying to get the word out, cool. But if you're doing DevRel on behalf of some other company, which 95% of you are doing, be careful. When you start getting away from the thing that connects you back to what pays for you and so forth. And again, this shouldn't be just about job. Or you sort of go, well, I'm independent. I'm my own brand. I'm my own thing. It does create a situation in which companies can't afford to not have DevRel, but on the flip side, can they afford to have DevRel? And anyways, so I'm over the 30-minute mark. I feel like I've gotten a lot off my chest. I've sort of tried to put some things in context. And again, this is not intended to sort of say DevRel is bad. I really kind of try to put this together in the context of, how we got here, why we started doing DevRel in the first place. Because again, the industry at the business level started saying, oh yeah, what developers can do and customize for our business and create and do interesting things for our business is probably really important. So we should be hiring those people. We should be trying to create good situations for them to do things for the business. And then, the technology entities, projects, companies, whoever started saying, hey, how do I get connected to them? And I feel like to a certain extent, we've gone through some phases that have been really good and really healthy. And we've seen a lot of really interesting people and interesting ways of connecting with stuff. But at the same time, I feel like we're starting to develop some bad habits, if you will, around the DevRel thing. And I put some things in the show notes in terms of, kind of some goods and some bads and some best practices and so forth. And my only guidance to the folks that are in the DevRel community, having lived in the technical marketing community for a long time, be careful, because at the point where developers say you're not technical enough and marketers say you're not helping me market what I do, well, if the developers love you, but you're not connected back to the people that you're supposed to be relling on behalf of, you get yourself into some weird situations. And I'll leave it at that. We love having DevRel people on the show. We've had them on for a long time. This is not an anti-DevRel sort of rant, but again, being an old guy and having been around this industry for a long time and sort of seeing certain patterns, it's just a hygiene thing. Be careful out there, especially, again, if you haven't lived through when times get tough or when things get kind of questioned. You want to be in yourself. You want to put yourself in a good position and be providing value in whatever you do, whether it's on one side of Dev or the other side of Rel or whatever. Just make sure that you're aligned to things that people that are connected to you feel are valuable. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Wow, this is a long Sunday perspective. I wasn't sure if it was going to go long or not. It was good to sort of think through a lot of those things because I think there's a lot of connected tissue there. So anyways, thanks everybody for listening. My voice is getting a little raspy, which means I've definitely been talking for way, way too long. Thanks for anybody who is still listening. Thanks for everybody who listens every week, tells a friend, helps us grow the show, helps us grow the community, helps us find great guests, gives us feedback, and it's good to be back doing Sunday Perspectives, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.